Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. It's just about 10 o'clock. Um, First off, I just want to introduce myself for those of you who may not know me. My name is Stacy Charpentier, and I'm the director for the Center for Addiction Recovery Training here at CCAR. Usually, Art Woodard is the one who hosts these webinars, but as a lot of you know, he is in the hospital and he is not going to be able to join us today. But I didn't want to put this off because I know this topic is really important, and a lot of people have reached out wanting to make sure that we were still going to run it this morning. So I do what Art does. I took the challenge and I did a lot of learning about resolving conflict. And I'm hoping that you and I will all learn from each other this morning on this topic because I know it's really important, not just as coaches, but just in general. So let's take a look at where we're going to go today regarding our learning objectives and what we're going to cover in this next hour. So what I'm hoping is that we will have an understanding of what conflict is. We're going to look at ways to resolve conflict. We're going to learn some de-escalation techniques. And we're going to look at the three-legged stool because it can really assist us when conflict arises. And what I would like to encourage is the use of the chat box because as we get started, I'm going to ask you all questions. I want input from you out there. I want to treat you all as resources and really get a sense of where you might be experiencing conflict, what you think about conflict, in order for all of us to be able to learn together this morning. So first off, I'm going to ask a very general question. What is conflict? So if you can use the chat box just to write some few key phrases, brief definition, what do you define as conflict? Karen says miscommunication. Very good. Absolutely. Sometimes just what we're thinking when facts aren't the same, says Tammy. Absolutely. A difference of opinions not being addressed, a disagreement between two or more. Absolutely, those are all really good definitions. I mean, and a lot of times when we see conflict, we see it as like, oh my goodness, this is going to be something that is negative, right? We kind of look at conflict situations. I know I have a 14-year-old daughter at home, and she doesn't want to make anybody unhappy or make anybody feel ill at ease. And so she hates conflict. She won't even ask to change the channel on the TV because she doesn't want to, she doesn't want to create conflict. And really, as Linda states too, friction and disagreement. And it's really one of the reasons why, those are all kind of things that are uncomfortable. So why do we typically avoid it? So how many of you try to avoid conflict if you can? And why do we do that? I see Liz is typing and Tammy. Fear. Thank you, Corrine. Matt says he's a lover, not a fighter. Tammy, she does, and it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. See some more people are typing. Reject, or it's easier to keep from having a hostile environment and don't want anyone to feel bad or hurt someone's feelings. Absolutely. And that's what, I was talking about with my 14-year-old. She doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and so she kind of keeps her feelings bottled up to make other people happy. And that's not really a great place to be either. So when I went to go and look at the definition of conflict, it's a serious disagreement or an argument, which is pretty much why we don't have we don't want to have conflict. We want to avoid it. Hannah, you might have to go into the top of um, your menu bar and click to enable your speakers. I do know that others are able to hear me, so I'm not sure um, why you're not able to, but there is, if you go into your top menu bar, there is a way to enable your speakers. And yes, here, I'll just type in this little chat box. Yes, if you can enable the speakers in the menu bar. Hopefully that will help. So let's take a look at why we might avoid conflict. So this is something that someone said, fear of rejection when standing up for ourselves, not believing that you have a valid opinion, unsure of what you actually need and want, having a negative experience or two, possibility of hurting someone else's feelings, and lack of confidence and conviction in your values and beliefs. And Ashley, if you can just email me, I'll put my email address here afterwards because I am recording it now and I can try to make that available for folks. So there's a lot of reasons why we typically avoid comment or conflicts. And a lot of these reasons that we have listed here are some of the reasons that you all mentioned. So any thoughts? Does this pretty much line up with what we've been talking about so far this morning? Okay. Great. So at least we're all on the same page. So what are some examples of conflict that can arise in our work, especially as recovery coaches? Denial of a problem, boundary crossing, not having your directives met, hospital staff lacking empathy, I see a bunch of people are typing, so I'm just going to give it a minute so that we can. A coworker not staying in their lane as a recovery coach. So yeah, these are all pretty valid areas of conflict. Absolutely. And sometimes we don't always feel it. We don't always feel, if we go back to that last slide, if you think about not believing you have a valid opinion, having a negative experience or two when approaching conflict, hurting someone else's feelings, or a lack of confidence in your values and beliefs, this might be areas where we typically try to avoid it. And let's see, the person not valuing your role or position. Tammy says multiple pathways to recovery, 12-step versus church. Daniel, having an unpopular opinion. Absolutely. And I see Courtney is typing. Having someone question your skills because you're just an RC. Absolutely. So a lot of these pieces are us really trying to assert ourselves in our role as recovery coach. And, working with hospital staff who may not value the skills that we have, who may not value our opinion because we're just an RC. These are all areas where, that's definitely conflict. But at the same time, if we don't move forward and try to address and resolve some of this conflict, we won't really have any production. and moving forward and really getting our point across, or getting people to see us as, wow, having value. So let's take a look at this next slide. Because conflict does have a use and it can be very productive. Not everyone has the same experiences, beliefs, and values, so hearing differing opinions on a subject might be extremely helpful. The idea here is to come to a resolution, and that's the whole point of a conflict and a confrontation. You know, unresolved disagreements leave everyone feeling worse off than before. So, as I said, a lot of times we're afraid to have our point made because we don't want to, ruffle any feathers. But at the same time, you know, if we know that there's a different, a better way to do something, who who gets hurt if we don't speak up? So that's my question. Who do we hurt if we don't go through and speak up for some of the things that you mentioned? Ourselves, the recoveries, absolutely ourselves and the recoveries, all parties involved, self first and those we serve. I see some people are typing. Eventually the RC. There should be volume on the iPad, but just hopefully that'll resolve it. Eventually the RC. Yeah, absolutely. So if we're working, Daniel says conflict is good at times, but it is for being part of a solution or just creating a problem and trying to win in an argument. Absolutely, Daniel. That's the whole piece, is that we want conflict to be productive. We don't want to just win at something because we want to win. It's not a competition, it's conflict. You have an opinion and I have an opinion, and somehow we have to come together, so that all of our opinions are heard. But if we have to make a decision on something, let's try to come to it and resolve it together. And a lot of times people see conflict, as I stated, for all those reasons that we avoid, as something, harmful. We're going to hurt somebody's feelings. We don't have a high enough opinion of what we have to say to bring it forward. And yet a lot of that is just that preconceived notion of what this is going to look like, as opposed to really going into it with, that it can be very productive to have conflict, and that's okay. you know More opinions are often better than just one opinion, and there's a lot of growth in that. So again, when conflict arises, we may choose to approach the situation or to avoid it. And a lot of times it's that fight or flight kind of thing. Like if somebody says something and we know that it's wrong, it takes a lot of skill to kind of figure out how to address it, how to get in there. Or maybe it's just not the right time. And so maybe we avoid it for now and then come back to it afterwards. So, what are the potentials in approaching a situation? What are the potentials of going into the conflict head on? What are some issues that could happen in that situation? I see Karen is typing. And then Matt says, big difference between dialogue and debate. Moving from one another is an art. And then definitely smile. And this situation could worsen. Absolutely. If tensions are high, then we definitely don't want to, absolutely, Nicole, say something you'll regret later. If we're going into something and it's gotten so big, or the conflict, you can feel it, we could, as Lori says, damage the relationship, can make things worse. And I see Robin and Maureen are typing. Always deep breath first. Absolutely. Sometimes we just have to get our own bearings under control before we can get into a conversation like, so that's what we want to talk about, and so a lot of times we avoid it and then we never go back to it, but at the same time, what are we going to do? Feel free to walk away, center before re-entering, if at all, right? Could be that it's not worth the conversation or not worth the argument. Maybe we need to check our facts and figures and realize, you know what? This isn't that big of a deal. What's that thing? Choose your battles. We have Matt said, feel free to walk away, center before re entering, if at all. And then Tammy says, good to talk with someone that is objective. Absolutely. If we have an opinion and we're not sure, bring it up to somebody and say, hey, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Tell me if I'm wrong on this. Let me run this by you. Robin says, how about working with individuals who are passive aggressive, who send such long emails after we've discussed our differences, but they needed to say a lot more? Oh, absolutely. And I think that's really one of those pieces where it is hard to kind of get that final, like, are we all on the same page here? Are we good? Is everybody feeling okay? And people will give that, yeah, uh-huh, we're good. And then they go back and then they spill off a whole big thing, as Robin indicated, well, these are actually what I'm talking about. Um, you know, and that's tough. So let's get further with this and see if we can kind of pull back to what do we do in that situation, Robin. And as Matt says, there are no big deals, right? So yeah, I mean, nothing is um so big that we can't solve it, right? Absolutely. When it comes to our beliefs and values, and that's what we're talking about, when we get into places like this, absolutely, we're emotionally connected. Thank you, Stephanie. So just to summarize, when we want to approach a conflict, it's because we truly care about the issue at hand. You care about the relationship, and a decision needs to be made. We might want to avoid it if tempers are truly heated, and we're not going to do anything productive when we're both in places of anger and tempers are flared, or if the issue isn't really all that important. It's that whole thing like, um, do we really have to win at this? Is it really just, trying to win an argument, as Daniel said earlier? And maybe we don't really care about this relationship. Maybe this isn't something that we really need to think about anymore after this conversation. That, you have a disagreement, I have a disagreement, and we can go our separate ways and never to the paths shall meet again. And so we don't really have to worry about it too much, But again, where are we on the scale? If we're looking at recovery coaching, we might be more in a place where we want to approach some of these things, and it's just a matter of when. If we hear somebody using harmful language to somebody that we're providing services to in an emergency room, we might want to take that person aside after and just say, hey, I noticed, you use some disparaging language. Can I talk to you about, maybe some positive language to use? I mean, there are definitely some ways to go about that. So let's take a look. So resolving conflict takes some skill and patience. So I compiled a few questions that we can kind of go through and just to kind of get us to prepare for some of these situations. So what is it that you're hoping to achieve? And I think Daniel said, argument for the sake of arguing doesn't really help anyone. That's not going to help anyone if we're just fighting to fight or have the biggest voice or say the last word. And Steven says, does group conscious work? Yeah, I mean, at this point, I always look at um, there's something called modified consensus, right? And so I may not agree with a decision that is made. Let's say we're meeting as a team and everybody has this, this side of an argument and I'm kind of holding back. Is my point really all that important? Can I let it go? Can I compromise a little bit? And so if I look at something called modified consensus, yes, I'm going to go with it and I'm going to publicly support it. So, at some point I might have to let my little argument go for a little bit and go on with the large group because that's what needs to happen. But when I'm outside of those doors, I'm going to support the decision that we all made. I'm not going to backtrack and be like, well, yeah, the decision was this, but I was really thinking it was. That doesn't help anybody. So, in whatever situation, when you're resolving conflict, if you've come to a decision, you have to agree to stick to it. Because if you're not going to, then there was no point in having the conversation. If you haven't gotten to that resolution where you feel that, okay, I can live with this, then the conversation shouldn't be over, because it shouldn't be, okay, I can live with this for the next 2 seconds while we're facing each other. And as soon as you walk away, I'm going to now do some negative talk and talk behind your back and say, well, that decision was just ridiculous. I would never have agreed to that. That doesn't help anybody. So let's see what Carolee says. I've experienced ongoing issues with another agency. I've tried to resolve some of them. I've come to the conclusion that I just don't refer recoveries there anymore for services. If they specifically ask about the agency, I say give it a try. It's an ethical dilemma, though. Carolee, that's a very good thing to say. I mean, it really depends on the issues that you're having and what they're doing. And what you'd be referring them to. I mean, I guess it would kind of be, you know, you have to go back if you're looking at, the ethics piece of it. Could there be harm if somebody goes to this agency for services? What is that harm? Um, and how can you maybe give them some other options? What are the other agencies that might be able to do the same thing? And I hear, because part of the thing about being a recovery coach is people are trusting our opinion for recommendations and for referrals. So I'd be a little more questioning as to what the issue is, before I specifically allowed people to go ahead and go there. If anybody has any additional information or different experiences for Carolee other than mine, please feel free to type in the chat box. Let me move on to Robin. That's the passive aggressive way. This leads them to leaving the agency before they're fired. This issue sabotages our agency. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I kind of look at, again, when people are coming to us for our opinion, they want our opinion. And so we have to be real with people. I don't know if I would go through and refer somebody to something that I wouldn't refer my own family to. And so that's where I would kind of go with something like that. Or at least that's my feeling about it. So I'm going to go through and move on to the next question. Courtney, I think if there's no harm to recoveries, I would still refer they need the services. If it's a personal thing due to a small town area, I think that's different. Okay, yeah, I mean, we don't really know the specifics of what the issues are, um, or anything else. I mean, if somebody comes to me and wants to, still go somewhere, I mean, that's their personal right to be able to do that. But again, I mean, I think referrals are one of those things, and we talk about it in the RCA, kind of look at, that list of questions, to see, is this somewhere that I would send my family member to? Steven says, what happens when the agency seems incompetent on the professional level? Well, I mean, and that's, one of those pieces where we might have to go in and resolve some conflict. We might have to go in there and have a conversation. What are the outcomes that you're seeing that makes you believe that they're having some issues? And maybe I have to go in and have a conversation. Maybe I need to get my supervisor um, involved. Maureen, it's also possible someone could have an entirely different positive than you did. Absolutely. I had some serious issues with the recovery house. I see Patricia's. Nope, that's okay. So, again, I think that goes back to one of those pieces where we, as recovery coaches, have to go into our toolbox and our list of resources, investigate, go in, have conversations, make sure that the people who are on our list of who we're referring to are things that we believe in, that we know they're going to help the people that we serve. Because if not, that's a reflection on us too. So, going back to this list on resolving conflict, whom do you need to speak about this? Sometimes when we're looking at conflict, you might have an opinion of something, and I might have an opinion on something, and it's not even the two of us that have to worry about it. Maybe we need to bring it to a supervisor. So, think about all the different parties that need to be involved when you're looking at resolving conflict. Okay, hold on. Nicole says, when I experience caseworkers that lack professional etiquette, I contact the higher ups and typically things improve immediately. And then Patricia says, we've had a meeting and decided not to refer to the house. However, if they asked, we told them it was an option. However, they were no longer certified. Thank you for clearing that up. Absolutely. I think sometimes, it's just a matter of we have to go in and do our own personal investigation, our personal um, understanding of what's going on with a particular agency and make some decisions from there. And if there is some conflict, then we need to figure out how to resolve it. So when we're going back to looking at, some of those questions that we can ask ourselves in advance, what points do you want to make? Remember, a lot of times we need to think about what is it that we really want to say when we're resolving conflict. We got to keep the personalities out of it. So, what is the real point? Why am I so upset about this issue and why am I wanting to resolve it? So, really think about the points that you want to make. How can you word it most simply and effectively without hurting feelings unnecessarily? So absolutely, I need to know what their point is, what my point is, and how I can make it very clear. Let's see, hold on. Matt says, sober, gentle, kind, loving, repeat. And I always like to have a water close by. Solution to population is dilution, or pollution is dilution. Sip of recovery. Most people are not ready to hear. Let them be who and where they are. Don't punch them in their face. And Carolee says, Matt, you are awesome. Absolutely. Do not punch anybody in their face, right? That's not how we resolve conflict. Have you ever considered your own feelings or have you considered your own feelings objectively? So this is definitely something that you have to kind of think about again. Where am I coming from? Why am I so concerned about this issue? Are my feelings objective? Is this a constructive conversation for the progress of the relationship? Absolutely. Are we going to be able to have a constructive conversation? If we're not going to be able to get to that point where we're actually having some give and take in this conversation, it's never going to amount to anything. Stephanie says, I like to speak from a very fact-based place. Absolutely. And sometimes when we're thinking about our own personal beliefs and values, it's hard to remember to stay calm. It's hard to remember to use more the objective side than our emotional side. Absolutely. But it's definitely one of those pieces that if you look at these questions, we definitely want to take some advice here and kind of look at how is it that we're approaching this conflict so that we come at it from a place that's really going to get to the heart of the matter and that's going to be constructive so that we can come to some resolution. So I want to take a look at the three-legged stool. So I know this really lists the fundamentals of recovery coaching and treating people as resources. And I think this is something that we really need to kind of take a nod from when we're talking about resolving conflict, because a lot of the pieces or the legs of the stool can really help in this situation. And so before I kind of go through some of these, what are your all thoughts on looking at the three-legged stool and how that can help us resolve some conflict? So Patricia says, I totally agree with Stephanie. I have very strong feeling on Matt. However, instead of referring to feelings, I give facts. Thank you. Daniel, I love this example. Lori, getting clarity on what the issues really are. Matt says, stay balanced, be helpful only when they are ready and when we are asked. Tammy, it's a good reminder. We should have it hanging in our office. Margaret, looking at the stool helps us stay focused and objective. Nicole, discovering and managing your own stuff, leaving your personal stuff at the door. Heidi, can I see? Yes, Heidi, send me an email and I'll send you the slides. Absolutely. And I'll go back for a second just so you can take another look at that. I'm sure we all um, have that three-legged stool ingrained in our brain. Absolutely. A good reminder to be aware of my own reactions, and everything begins with active listening. Absolutely. And so with that, so how can active listening help us with conflict resolution? So what are the reasons why we need to actively listen? When you're actively listening, you set the tone for the other person. Nicole, treating people as resources and listening actively are so key when it comes to positive communication. Karen says to really understand the problem. Absolutely. So let's take a look at some of these pieces. So active listening helps us build trust and establish a rapport. Absolutely. We want to make sure that we're not going into an argument where we don't have, or not an argument, but a conflict or what may seem as an argument, without trying to build some inroads with that person. And building trust and establishing a rapport really helps to do that. Okay, Pauline, I see your comment. Whoever wants anything for this, if you can at the end of it, just shoot me an email because I'm never going to remember exactly who was on this morning. So just shoot me an email at stacy@ccard.us and I'll send you what you need. Patricia says to understand what the person wants and not necessarily what we think they should want. Absolutely. The other piece is that it demonstrates concern. You're welcome, Ruth. Paraphrase to show some understanding. The non-verbal cues which show understanding, such as nodding, eye contact, and leaning forward. Brief verbal affirmations like I see, I know, sure, thank you, or I understand. Waiting to disclose your opinion. Disclosing similar experiences to show understanding. If you think about having to go into some sort of conflict and going into it with a lot of what we know about active listening, that's going to bring us a huge way into resolving it. I mean, when you think about a lot of times, especially when we're gearing up for something, we already have our responses forming. We're not really listening to the person. We're thinking about what we're going to come back with. That's not going to get us anywhere because we're not actively listening. So we really need to take a cue from our three-legged stool and make sure that we're really going into this wanting to get to that constructive resolution, wanting to have that conversation and get to a place of where, we have some trust and we've built a relationship of which to kind of build on and kind of go, hear each other's opinions. So the next piece is, and why I'm not sure why it's not going to my next slide here, but let's think about asking good questions. So let me just see why this isn't going back and forth. So I lost my slides. So let's think about asking good questions. Patricia said, I was speaking with someone yesterday and she says, it sounds like, and I understood why that is such an important way to have a conversation. I've said it a million times, but it was different hearing it from someone else. Was a good experience. Thank you very much for sharing that. And so I'm having some, oh, there we go. So how can asking good questions help with conflict resolution? So there's just a quick little comic here. You know, we talked about finding a good time. Hey, can I ask you about this? State what you know. Asking factual questions, choosing whom to ask, do some research. You know, so what is it about asking good questions that can help us with conflict resolution? So that's my question to you all. So if we're treating the other person as a resource, how will asking good questions help us resolve the conflict ahead? A good question helps the person who answers resolve the problem, narrowing the problem to the source. It helps to understand what is upsetting the other person. Thank you. Honest questions may get honest answers. Very good. Thank you, Pauline. And I see someone else is typing, so I just want to give it a minute to come through. Open questions allow a person to focus on the problem and not distract. Absolutely. Lets the other person know we are working towards a resolution. Thank you, Tammy. Absolutely. Know your recovery so you will ask good, pertinent questions. Think that asking good questions allows the person to feel like they are playing a role in this decision-making process. And Matt says guiding through problem towards a solution. Absolutely. So again, this leg of the stool is really going to help get us to that place of resolving something that's going on. So asking those open-ended questions provides us with information. You know, it gives us some of those answers that maybe we're still struggling with. Allows us to seek some clarification. We get a better understanding of what the differences in opinion are and why they may exist. And are there options I haven't even considered? A lot of times when we're going into these places of conflict, we're going in with our own opinion, our own beliefs and values. Asking good questions may give me a whole bunch of information that I've not even considered. And I might change some thinking on my own side, you know, as we get to this resolution. So I know some people threw up some comments, so let me just go through and read those off for folks. Let's see. Charlene said, good questions empower the other person to be part of the solution. Steven says, good questions clarify the issues. Maureen, treat the recovery as a resource while asking questions. Daniel states, helps us to understand what individual needs and what recovery looks like for them. Absolutely. You know, when we think about some of the instances that came up for us earlier when we were looking at conflict and the issues that might arise, you know, if we go back to some of these legs of the stool, then we absolutely can look at, you know, what is it that we're trying to get out here? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? You know, why is there conflict? And so if I look at this and I come into it with an open mind and ask those good open-ended questions, I'm going to get a whole lot of information, and I'm also going to hear where that person's coming from. Robin says, being open to listening to how the other person is, process the issues without being judgmental. Absolutely. You know, if we're going to have a conversation, we need to be there 100%. We need it to be constructive. If we're going to resolve any kind of conflict, we can't come in with our own, you can have your points and things, but the object here is to come up with a resolution, not to just win. It's a completely different thing. So let's look at managing our own stuff. So, how does managing our own stuff help with resolving conflict? Helps us to not be so judgmental, says Lori. I see a bunch of people are typing. Karen, to ensure we are not coming from a place of character defects. Pauline, good examples. Yeah, absolutely. When we think about managing our own stuff, some of that just might mean, putting my emotions aside because I have to look at this objectively. Margaret says it helps us stay in the present and be focused on the recovery. Be good role models and always trust our instincts. I see John and Pauline are typing, so let's see what they have to say. Keeps us balanced so we can be present and objective. Absolutely. And so we really want to make sure that we come from a place where, again, we have our points that, and Pauline says, agree, judgment is not good. So if you remember a few slides back, we want to make sure that we come with our points. We're coming at something from an objective place, not an emotional place. And so let's kind of take a look at, what we're looking at here. Matt says right size, no power differential. Absolutely. So can we compromise for a win-win? Can we both get something out of this? Is this something I can't live with? Or is this really something I can't live with and support? Remember, we talked about earlier, sometimes coming up with a decision and then, not really being 100% about that decision. And so when I walk outside the door, I'm bad mouthing a decision. That's not a good place to be at. We really need to go to, is this really something that I can't live with? If it's like that on both sides, then we haven't resolved it. So we have to get to that place where this is something that I can publicly live with and I can publicly support, because that's huge, especially when we're looking at, going into these agencies as recovery coaches. If there's something that, we as an agency have made a decision on, I can't go into this hospital and badmouth a decision that my agency made. That's going to make our whole agency look horrible. And then how am I going to look? So I really have to make sure it's not just whether I can live with it and support it. I have to be able to publicly support it. That's huge. And then looking at, why am I so passionate about this in the first place? Maybe there's some things that I need to look at. Maybe there's some things that I have to go back to and look at. So let's see, Patricia, I have things that bring up emotional triggers from my own past and need to use my path of recovery, which for me is to talk to others or your sponsor. What is my motivation? So exactly, where am I coming from? What is the place that I'm coming from right now? So that I really make sure that I'm coming at this with the best intentions, and I'm open to resolving the conflict. That's the other piece here, people. We have to be open to resolving it. We can't just put our feet in the sand and then stop and then not be willing to compromise even a little bit. And Matt says, yes, remain teachable. What is a third way? Absolutely. You have your way, I have my way, but if we're going to work on this together, maybe we need to come up with another way. And that goes to, really, if you look at asking those good questions, maybe we'll come up with a completely different way that neither of us have thought about before. So let's look quickly at some 10 tips for resolving conflict. So if you can, choose a good time and place to talk. You know, I think this is one of those things where when you really think about resolving conflict, you don't want to be in a public space. You don't want to, if somebody calls out and says something to you, you don't want to jump right back in it if you're in a room full of people. Maybe you have to kind of, again, if you have to take that breath and remove yourself from the situation, get all your points together and invite that person to chat on the side in an office, wherever it is. You really have to find a good space and time to talk. Commit to finding a solution that satisfies each person's needs. Again, as even Matt said, we have to think about, what are we coming away with here? Are we both looking to just win-win? How do we get to that third choice, Listen carefully and restate what you've heard. Again, active listening. We need to kind of make some inroads with this person. If we want them to hear our side, we need to also hear theirs. Talk about the issues, not the people. Again, we want to stay objective and leave those emotions out of it. Use I statements. This is huge. If I'm really feeling like I can't get behind something, I need to know why, and I need to be able to state it and come at it from me, using me. Acknowledge the points of the agreement. Maybe there are some things that we agree upon, and maybe there are some things that we don't agree upon. But acknowledging those points where we are kind of on the same page will get us a lot further. Describe your emotions. If you're feeling a certain way about it, try to figure out how to describe it. Maybe again, if you look at managing your own stuff, maybe there's some information there that we can draw out from and really understand why you're so passionate about this. Be specific in describing what you need. Be open to creative solutions. And remain calm and avoid becoming defensive. So what are your thoughts about these top 10 tips for resolving conflict? Is there anything that we've missed? I see Courtney is typing. And Margaret? It's a great list and it's practical. Thank you. These are all great, but what happens when the other parties are not coming from the same place? Wow, Courtney, that is a really good question. I mean, I know we're trying to get ourselves to be on the best plane to be able to solve conflict, and I guess it just goes back to what do we have to do to make those inroads? How can we ask good questions to get that person on our side or to see that point? Maureen, number 6 can be especially useful. Hopefully, practicing the first 9 will help me with 10. I intend to avoid or flip out. Yeah, Courtney, I think that's a really good question too, as far as, I can come from a place where I feel that I'm going to come into this wanting to resolve something. And if that person isn't willing or isn't able to or isn't going to get to that place, then maybe some of it is that we have to agree to walk away. Maybe we have to agree that this isn't going to happen right now. But I think, on top of all of this, it's really about making sure that our intentions are in the best place. And if we go into it that way, I mean, hopefully people will see that, but if they don't, then maybe this isn't a fight that we're going to do today. This isn't a conflict that we're going to resolve today. And unfortunately, I'm sure that that's going to happen. But at least we know, as Margaret said, maybe it's just not the right time yet. Yes, I completely got it. Not with a client, but with coworkers. Daniel, roll with resistance. Number 7, be sure we don't load them with guilt. And Liz is typing. So before I move to the next one, okay, I'm going to just share this next slide while that's coming up. Courtney, sometimes you have to be the bigger person and just let it go, even though you may not be the person at fault. Thank you for saying that. So one of the pieces about conflict is sometimes things can escalate, right? And that's one of the reasons why we tend to avoid it. We don't want to get into fights with people. We don't want to have these arguments. But a lot of times our own personal beliefs and values and opinions come into play, which is why I caution about, managing our own stuff. But what happens, is that conflict can be productive, and we know this. And so, what happens if, again, and this maybe even goes back to Courtney's point, is what if it's escalating? And some signs of escalation is a person starts clutching his or her fists or untightening their jaw, changing their body language or tone, starts pacing or fidgeting, change in the type of eye contact. There's the rooster stance where like the chest starts to protrude out more and the arms move away from the body. Their breathing changes, thank you, Maureen. Or they have some disrupting behaviors such as yelling or bullying, actively defying or refusing to comply with rules. I mean, these are definitely some things. Matt says, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? I mean, it is one of those things where even though, as we said, we want to try to get to a place where we're coming into something to be truly productive. We want this to be a productive conversation so that we can both leave here with the conflict resolved. But if that person is, the conflict is escalating, we want to know how we can diffuse it. And so if we're upset, it's only going to escalate the situation. So as Maureen said, maybe we need to change our breathing. So we need to calm down and take a deep breath. And this is also one of those things, maybe this isn't the right place and time. If I'm that upset and I am not able to calm myself down, I can't go into a situation like that. Thank you, Carolee. Trying to resolve conflict with a bully is always challenging and it takes courage. Absolutely. It takes a lot of bravery to even go into conflict in the first place, whether that person's a bully or not. So we definitely want to think about those things. So listen to the person's concerns. Let's see. Acknowledge the other person's feelings without passing judgment on them. Empathy needs to be shown during conflict situations. Even if you do not agree with the person's position, expressing and understanding why that person feels a particular way will help resolve the conflict. And I'm going to move over to the chat box because I saw some things come up. So Patricia says, I worked for years in the detention center and I always sat down to talk with clients. If a client stood up during the conversation, it was usually time to try to de-escalate or push the control button. And Matt says, act with heart. Absolutely. I mean, if somebody's really getting upset, there are things that we can do. And maybe some of that is also walking away and just agreeing to disagree at this point and come back at it another time. So clarifying, paraphrasing, and open-ended questions all help to ensure that the person is aware you have understood their frustrations completely. Agree to disagree. Don't make a decision right now. Reschedule some time to meet in the future when tempers aren't flared. Conflict is a part of any relationship, personal or professional, and understanding how to resolve it will help improve stress and happiness. It also takes a lot of practice. So, To wrap up, I have a couple of points to make, but I really want to hear from you guys as to what's your biggest takeaway from today. Diana, you can just use the chat box down below. Ruth says, love the use of the three-legged stool. Matt says, gratitude. Thank you. Resolving conflict is a skill that can be learned. Absolutely. I see some other people are typing. Difficult conversations do not ever have to spiral out of control. Thank you, Maureen. That conflict happens and it's okay. It can be a part of our personal and professional lives. John says flexibility is key. Conflict can be positive and productive. Be courageous and humble in approaching resolution. Pat says, I took this webinar due to some conflict I've been having at work and I tend to get very defensive. I think it will help me achieve more positive outcomes. Well, thank you, Pat. I hope that it does give you a little bit more understanding and you can get into the resolution of the conflict that you're having. Daniel says, managing your own stuff to be in a good place to be able to help others. I see some more folks are typing. So let me just go through these last couple of bullets here. So one of the things about conflict is we have to remain curious. Again, if we're going in with just our opinion and just our way of thinking and we're not curious to what options may be out there, it may be hard to get to that resolution. So we always have to remain curious. Sometimes you may need to concede or admit that you made a mistake. Being vulnerable helps. Again, why am I so passionate about this issue? Am I unwilling to see somebody else's side? Conflict takes two sides, and I have to be willing to maybe let some things go. Ask for what you want and need. This takes a huge amount of courage. It's very hard to kind of go through and express those things, which is again why we want to prepare, think about the points that we want to make. You deserve to have your opinion heard. You count. If you have an opinion about something or you have a disagreement that you want to go into because you really have a valid point to make, you should make it. You deserve to have that opinion heard. And as always, you need to have respect for yourself and others. So let's see. Daniel said managing your own stuff to be in a good place, to be able to help others. Avoid making simple problem escalate to a bigger issue. Handle the situation with a soft tone and be consistent. Diana says, I always tread lightly, but feel avoiding conversations do not support our good reputations as recovery coaches. Courtney gave me a lot to think about and how I may approach the subject of conflict in different ways. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of some of this going through and really kind of breaking things down, anytime we hear the word conflict, we want to retract and retreat and kind of, no, I don't want to deal with it. But it is very positive to be able to go in and really look at, well, why does the conflict exist? What is it that I hope to achieve by resolving it? And make sure that you're coming at it from a good place. And again, that three-legged stool, I think that there's a lot there, asking good questions, actively listening, and managing our own stuff is really going to be key in going to try to find that resolution. I see that Margaret is typing. So I just want to give her a chance to finish up any final comments. Oh, Margaret and Daniel. So let them go through and give any final thoughts. C-car stool and 2 questions are always good. Thank you so much for stating that. I know we have it on a banner and we've been bringing it to some of our sessions. I think maybe I need to come up with it on a poster so other people can use it. Margaret reminds us that conflicts will happen and that we need to be prepared as professionals to handle it with skill and compassion. Absolutely. We want to treat people with dignity and respect always. What can I help you with recovery and what does recovery look like for you? Great idea regarding the poster, please. Okay, Ruth, I will work on that. So, any other final questions or comments regarding this? Again, if you want any of the slides, email me. I'm happy to share. Thank you, Stacy Rock. Thank you, Nicole. Glad you could be here. Carolee, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. Yes, I did record it. Maureen, thank you for being here. Heidi, thank you very much. Wonderful. Oh, thank you guys. Means a lot. Yes, Lori, if you send me an email to stacy@ccard.us. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I will email things out after the presentation. If you need anything, please get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to send whatever it is